Thank you, Joshua. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this final presentation for 2020. What a crazy year it's been. But let's see how we get on. I'm going to start off with some statistics of world tuber crops. Then we'll move on to the phenology and the physiology of tuber crops. We'll then move on to Multicote technology for efficient nutrition, just some background on how Multicote works. And then we'll move on to Multicote Agri for tuber crops. And that is where we make fertilizer solutions for each crop. We'll talk about some of the formulas. We'll talk about the application, which is critical. And we'll show you some proven results from around the world. And then we will also talk about the approaches that we follow as a general sort of guideline from which you can base a fertilizer program using controlled release fertilizer. And then we'll conclude with just some take-home points. So can you guys all hear me? So I can just get an indication. Can everybody hear me? Is it clear? Thank you. All right, so some of the statistics. This is a graph from the FAO, or a map of the world, showing potato production around the world. The darker the country, the higher the production from that country. So you can see pretty much the whole world is producing potatoes. If we look at just on potato, there's 388 million tons worldwide that is produced according to FAO on 19.4 million hectares that they estimate, which gives you an average production around the world of 20.1 tons per hectare. If we look at sweet potato, which is another tuber crop, we're looking at 113 million tons worldwide on 9.2 million hectares, which gives you basically 12.2 tons a hectare as an average production. Then we talk about cassava, which is another huge crop if you compare it to the potatoes, 277 million tons on 24.5 million hectares, which gives you an average production of 11.3 tons per hectare. And then on the yams, which is the last of the tuber crops, 7.25 million tons worldwide, or 72.5, where am I going now? And then 87 on 8.7 million hectares. So that gives you an average production of 8.3 ton a hectare. This is about all I'm going to talk about on cassava and yams. If anybody has an interest in fertilizing cassava and yams, please contact us after this presentation, and we can see what we can provide and what we can do. It's not something that is really uses a lot of specialty fertilizers, but if there's a need, then we will address it. All right, so if we look at the phenology and the physiology of tuber crops, I'm going to focus on potato. I think it's probably the biggest crop that we're looking at, and I think it is the one that has the most value, commercial value, so I think that's what we're focusing on. We'll also talk about sweet potato, but not on the phenology specifically. But if we look at the potato, you sit with your initial phase of growth, where your shoot development is the green line, and you can see it increases up to where the plant goes into flower, and then where it goes into its decline. But you can see that your tuber only starts developing quite late, and you have a very steep development. And then in the period that the plant is declining, the quality of the plant, the leaves are starting to go off, it's starting to withdraw nutrients from the leaves, and it's putting it into the tubers. So one needs to sort of know that and understand when these different processes are happening, so that you can time your fertilizer applications accordingly. So we're talking about sprouting and initiation in the first stage, 15 to 30 days after you've planted. Then we talk about stolon initiation as your second phase, which starts after emergence and continues until about 35 to 40 days after emergence, when the rows should be closing. And at that stage, your tuber initiation should begin, which is 15 to 30 days after emergence. And then your tuber filling stage, which is your critical stage, 45 to 90 days after emergence. So it's in that period that your tuber filling is happening, and then your maturity and harvesting from 90 to 120 days, depending on the variety and depending on your day length that you would have. If we look at what's happening individually for each plant, in your sprouting phase, your dormancy break of the seed tubers, so you have to store them properly, you have to break the dormancy in the store so that the buds start sprouting and sprouts start developing. If your temperatures are too low, then you have a very slow development. And the starch in the seeds, in your tuber seed or your seed potato, provides the energy for up to 30 days after planting. So it's critical that your quality of seed that you keep has enough starch so that it can support itself for those first 30 days. Poor emergence will happen if your soil temperatures are lower than 15 degrees. Generally, you will get very poor growth. Your vegetative growth phase is the second phase. Your leaves and stems are developing. You've got 10 to 15 days after emergence where the leaves start producing their own energy or enough energy for the plant to continue. So that gives you, if you think you've got your sprouting 10 to 15 days or 15 to 30 days of your sprouting to emergence, you don't have a lot of time for your leaves to start producing energy. Your stolons are also beginning to form at this stage, and you're looking for an optimal soil temperature of around 25, air temperature of around 25 degrees. Your tuber initiation will start, and you can count backwards from flowering of the plant. It's the only visible sign that you'll see above ground. From flowering, you count back 10 to 14 days, and that's when the initiation will start on the ends of the stolon. This is what's happening then is the translocation of your carbohydrates from your leaves. So your leaves are producing energy in the form of carbohydrates, and these then have to translocate down to the stolon to start forming the tubers. At this stage, your abscisic acid and gibberellic acid balance, your hormone balance in the plant has to change. Gibberellic acid encourages vegetative growth, and your abscisic acid encourages reproductive growth. So you're wanting high abscisic acid, low gibberellic acid at the time of initiation. And this is affected by soil moisture, soil temperature, and also high N levels. And we will talk more on that later. Optimal temperatures for your air, 20 to 25 degrees, your soil, 15 to 20 degrees for good tuber initiation. The next phase is your tuber filling. And this is where your tuber becomes the primary sink for all nutrients and carbohydrates produced by the plant. So whatever energy the plant has, whatever nutrients it's uptaking, it's trying to send it down to the roots and to your tubers for filling. Your cells start gaining water and starch, and they start swelling. All the sugars in the leaves are converted to starch, which is then stored in the developing tubers. At this stage, high temperatures above 32 degrees can damage the tubers. You literally end up cooking your tuber in the ground. So you wanting to keep it cool at that stage. And then your final stage is the maturity, or your skin starts thickening, your dry mass increases to its maximum, and the plant begins dying above ground. It's critical at this stage not to let the plant die too early, because then your skins don't ripen and your plant, your maturity, your keeping quality of your tubers are very poor. So the longer the plant stays alive and does the final push into the tubers is important. If we look at the potato nutrient uptake curves, you can see this is a standard curve. There's lots of work being done. This is just one of them, and I'm going to show you a few examples. Basically, you can see in the first 20 days after emergence, your nitrogen, 25% of your nitrogen has already been taken up, whereas only 10% of your other elements, calcium, potassium, magnesium. And then you can see by 40 days after emergence, everything reaches a peak. You're sitting at between 30 and 35% uptake of all the nutrients except potassium, which is still around 15%. But you can see the potassium is now going to start increasing. And if you go back to the phenology of the plant, you'll see at this stage is when the initiation has now taken place, and this is the tuber filling stage. So in your filling stage, your potassium suddenly goes up to the peak, and your nitrogen has decreased. Your magnesium and calcium sort of stay on a balance because they keep the leaves active and they keep the plant in balance. So that's basically a general uptake. And if you look at it, if I do individual elements, you can see your nitrogen. You want high nitrogen at the start for the vegetative growth. When you get to tuber initiation, you want to lower or relieve the amount of nitrogen being released. And then you want a constant nitrogen all the way to the end. And the same for potassium is, well, not the same, but potassium starts off very slow and it increases. So if you can get that picture in your mind through the different growth stages, it will help you. Magnesium, you want a constant amount of magnesium all the way through. It's not a very big element that we need, but we need it all the time. Calcium, the same thing all the time from the start through to the finish, you're needing calcium. And then your phosphate, you can see phosphate wasn't in the previous slides, but phosphate, you need root development initially, but because your stolons and your tubers are developing in the soil, you need constant phosphate for that root development to take place. And just some of the influences of the different nutrients on the different plant or tuber quality. So tuber size is basically nitrogen, phosphate, potassium, magnesium, manganese, and boron. The number of tubers, the initiation will obviously be your phosphate and your potassium, having sufficient levels of that. The nitrogen isn't there, but it's critical that the nitrogen is not too high at that stage. Your tuber quality, you can see just about all the nutrients except sulfur play a role in tuber quality. Your skin finish is your calcium, magnesium, your sulfur, manganese, boron, zinc. And then your storage quality is affected by your potassium and your calcium content and also the boron that you've taken up. So it's important that you have all these in the right quantities for quality and for tuber quality. All right, so if we look at an uptake per ton, again, there's lots of work done all around the world, but the general rule of thumb is that you need 4 to 4.2 kilograms per ton of yield of nitrogen. You need 550 to 600 grams of phosphate per ton. You need 6 to 6.5 kilograms of potassium per ton. Your calcium has a very wide range, and I can't really explain why that is, but 0.1 to 1.6 kilograms per ton of yield. Magnesium also has quite a wide range from 350 to 1.1 kilogram per ton. Sulfur, you need 390 grams per ton of yield. On your micronutrients, this has changed to gram per ton. So you're sitting with zinc between 1.7 and 2.14 grams per ton of yield. Manganese, 1.5 to 18 grams. Iron, 36 grams. Copper, 1.8 to 3. Boron, 3.4 to 3.6. And then your chloride, you need 45 grams per ton. And then molybdenum, we need 0.1 gram per ton of yield. So you work out basically with this, you can take your expected yield and you can work out what you should be applying or what your soil needs to provide for the plant to grow optimally to get your yield. You can then, so basically you would deduct whatever the soil has. If you take your soil analysis, you deduct what the soil will produce, and you have to apply the balance to get a good crop. If we look at a graph of the NPK and when each element is needed, you'll see that we have 3 critical stages that we focus on at emergence, and then the period of tuber initiation. Before tuber initiation, that's where we look at critical applications of calcium and an NPK. And then you can see at the final stage, in the bulking up stage, you're looking at potassium nitrate. And the reason we push that potassium nitrate at the end there is that your daily requirement is 4.5 kilograms of N, 0.3 kilograms of P, and 6 kilograms of K for 1 ton of growth. And at this stage, in this final stage here, you are putting on between 1,000 and 1,500 kilograms per hectare per day. So this is basically what your fertilizer needs to be providing on a daily basis in this phase to make sure that you get maximum yield. Now, if we look at nitrogen, there are many tables like this. Potato South Africa has brought out a book with all these guidelines for potatoes, so you can find them there. You can basically determine your yield potential. You can determine the clay content from your soil analysis, and it gives you a guideline of how many kilograms. If you want 60 tons on a 10 to 20% clay, you go on 240. If you're on a very sandy soil, you would go 275 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. You can take it further. At what stage should you apply what percentage of the nitrogen? So you can, again, if you say your clay content is, say, 10% or less than 10%, 50 to 60% must be before tuber initiation, must be applied in that period, and the rest, the 40 to 50%, in the period after tuber initiation. And that helps you to determine how much N. What's also important, not just how much N, but also the type of nitrogen. And here you can see the result of trials. They've increased the level of N on the potato, and they've looked at what the yield is per plant. And basically, the form of nitrogen, when you're sitting, the orange is 80% ammonium, 20% nitrate. The light green is 50% nitrate, 50% ammonium, and the dark green is 20% ammonium, 80% nitrate. And you can see in each of these cases, even at increasing rates of nitrogen, you're getting much better yield with a 20% ammonium, 80% nitrate, which brings us back to why Haifa promotes potassium nitrate for potatoes. But this is one of the reasons, is to make sure you have your nitrate sufficient. If you look at when that N is needed and how much, and this is kilograms per hectare per day, you can see the light green here again is your leaves and stems that are growing, and the dark green is your tuber. And you can see that the orange line is basically the cumulative amount of nitrogen needed. So you need up to 6 kilograms per day, 40 days after emergence. So this gives you a basic graph of when you should be applying. And when we look at controlled release, we look at this orange line, and we try and make sure that our controlled release is releasing the right amount in these periods. So if we go to phosphorus, we have the same thing. There's a table again. You determine your potential yield. If you want 60 tons, you look at what soil analysis method has been used, and then you go and determine your phosphorus requirement based on that. And this is P in South African terms, but yeah. Again, if you go and look at the graph in kilograms per day of actual phosphorus, you can, again, it's the same color coding. So light green is the leaves and the stems, and the dark green is your tuber. And you can see you need up to 3 kilograms per day in this phase, 40 days after emergence. And then you need to have that release over the period. Potassium, we can do the same. Here we have two methods of determining your potassium. If your soils if you have good soils with a high cation exchange capacity of 6 or more, then you can use this top table, determine your tonnage, and then you can use the percentage of potassium as part of the cation exchange capacity. If you're on a very sandy soil, poor soil with a low cation exchange capacity, then we use the actual analysis in milligrams per kilogram, and we can determine again what our level of potassium should be. If we look at potassium as a source that matters, again, these are 4 different varieties of potatoes, and this is grams per plant that is being yielded per plant. And you can see the green bar is Multicote, which is potassium nitrate. The orange is potassium chloride, and the light green here is sulfate of potash. And you can see that in every single case here, potassium nitrate gives you almost double the yield under the same conditions as the other 2 forms of potassium. Now the question is, these 2 forms of potassium are relatively cheap, the potassium chloride, potassium sulfate. Potassium nitrate is significantly more expensive, but I think that if you can double your yield, the cost shouldn't be an issue of what the fertilizer costs, but what am I going to do to get the best yield? So your potassium requirements here, again, you can see going on the same, the orange line, we need up to 12 kilograms per day to be available 40 days after planting. and then you need, in the bulking phase, in your peak bulking phase, you need 6 kilograms per day, which comes back to that original graph that I showed you. Calcium, it's the same thing, also a table, also based on cation exchange capacity of 6 or more on the left, and you use calcium as a percentage of the cation exchange capacity. And we apply gypsum. We recommend gypsum normally. It is a cheap form of calcium. It is a slow release effect if you apply it into the soil, and it's in the root zone. So if you apply it into the root zone, then you know you're going to get good uptake there. And again, if you're on a very sandy soil, then we use the actual analysis in the soil to determine how many tons of gypsum per hectare you should be applying at planting or just pre-plant. And if you look at the calcium requirements, again, you need 40 days after planting, you're needing up to 5 kilograms per hectare per day. So this is why we, in the middle of the season, we apply calcium nitrate, is to try and address this peak, because you're not always sure if the roots are going to get all of it. Just a little bit more information on calcium uptake. Mostly calcium is taken up from the roots and into the leaves. The stolons and the tubers take calcium directly from the soil. So for the tuber, foliar calcium, any calcium that you apply as a foliar spray remains in the leaves. So it's not a way to boost calcium in the tuber. So it's something important. It is not the calcium is not mobile through the phloem, and you therefore don't get any. There's no point in applying it as a foliar thing. And on the right here, you can see how they've dyed the calcium, and you can see how the dye moves through and into the stolon as an example. All right, magnesium, again, is not something that you need a lot of, but if you are deficient, you will very quickly lose quality on your plants. It often looks like a nitrogen deficiency initially, and then you pump a lot of nitrogen and you still don't get any result. And then by the time it gets to the stage where you can see the brown holes forming, then it's too late really, and your plant starts dying and you lose yield as a result. So again, magnesium, all these graphs are slightly different, but all the same, 40 days after, and then in the tuber filling stage where you need your nutrients to be available. Just something on micronutrients, I'm not going to deal with all of them. Boron is immobile in the plant, so when it's taken up, where it is deposited, that's where it stays. It's synergistic to calcium uptake, so if you have calcium and boron in the soil together in the right ratios, then they get taken up together. It's used to stabilize calcium in the cell wall, so it's quite important to have. Cell division, it's also important in cell division and enlargement. And then it improves plant resistance to pest, disease, and environmental stresses. And then it reduces tuber discoloration. So when it comes back to quality of your tuber that you present to the market, you're wanting a good color on your tubers. You don't want them discoloring, and so it's important there. It's also a very toxic element if you apply just a little bit too much. So one has to be careful how you apply that, and this is why Haifa have developed a coated boron, which you can get a controlled release boron, releasing the boron over a period, which takes the risk out of using it. Yeah, you can also see the uptake. You can see leaves and the stems take up most of it, and then when you go to your bulking phase, you can see that the boron starts being translocated to some degree according to this data that was generated. If we look at boron as a deficiency across the world, you can see the high rainfall areas where you have very high leach sandy soils are usually deficient in boron and need to be applied. So one keep that in mind. If that is your area, it's something that you should be looking at. And then just to identify boron deficiency, you have bushy stunted plants. The young leaves tend to become chlorotic and sort of fold, not develop properly. And if you see it in your tuber, you can see your skins become rough and cracked, and then you often find these necrotic spots if you cut the potato open. I just want to talk a little bit on yield potential. Every crop and variety specifically has a yield potential based on its genetics and on the seed quality, and that's fixed. You can't increase that. You can only lose on that, and the losses are usually caused by abiotic factors such as sunlight, water, temperature, wind, soil, salinity, nutrients, and also on biotic factors such as weed competition, animals or pests or disease, and pathogens that damage the plant or compete with the plant for nutrients and for whatever else it needs. So basically, your potential is there. You can only start losing on it, and there's nothing you can do to increase that. So your management of these factors is what's important. Just something on what causes tuber initiation. If we look at hormones, I spoke about the abscisic acid and the gibberellic acid. I'm not going to touch on it again, but it's important that you get that balance right and that we use management tools to do that. Soil temperature, air temperature, planting in a time when you have the right temperatures is important. So that decides when you should plant, is when your climate is going to be right. Your moisture conditions, proper irrigation scheduling is critical. Your day length, as the days become shorter, the plant wants to finish initiation earlier, the phenological stadiums go faster, and your plant then will have less initiation. And then light intensity, the higher the light intensity, the stronger you need the right light intensity for the plant. And then obviously nitrogen management is essential. You want high nitrogen for the vegetative stage, but then you want the nitrogen to stabilize and slightly reduce when you're starting with initiation, and you want that to finish. So yeah, just to base it on, I don't think one can put enough effort or emphasis on nitrogen management in the initiation phase. If you have too much nitrogen, you have low abscisic acid, and then you have poor initiation. And basically what is happening, your plant is creating carbohydrates, and you want high carbohydrates in the plant for better initiation. But as soon as you apply too much N, then the plant puts those carbohydrates into vegetative growth and not into reproductive growth. So it's managing your stages there. High air temperatures, it's not something that we can manage really, unless you can manage it sometimes with a bit of overhead irrigation, you can cool. But basically, if you have to know what your temperature or your climate's going to be, and not plant when you're going to have temperatures over 30 degrees, because then you start reducing your yield potential. And high soil temperatures is the same thing. You can see there at 20 degrees, you've got an optimal root development. At 15, it's still okay, but at 10 degrees, you have poor root development. And then when it gets warmer, 25, 30, 35 degrees, again, you have poor root development. So knowing what your soils are going to do, what the temperatures are going to be, is critical to when you plant and what your potential yield is going to be. Wind, if you have high wind and you have very sandy soils, one needs to do something to protect the plants against wind. If you don't, you lose your yield again. Salinity, often we have soils which already have salinity problems, and there's not much you can do because it reduces your growth of your stem, leaves, tubers. It's just basically inhibiting. You end up with leaf chlorosis and tip burn, so your leaves start dying. Your water uptake is restricted by the roots. The roots don't develop well in this very saline soil, and you sit with a poor uptake. And as I say, when all three of those factors on the left here are in play, then you end up with a plant that dies off a lot earlier, which reduces your yield significantly. And basically, you end up with poor quality as well. And just as an idea, you're sitting with an EC of 1 in the soil, or 1.1, you're sitting at 0 crop loss. But if you go up to an EC of 1.7, you're sitting at 10%. And as the EC in the soil increases, so your production reduces. Moisture management, we've spoken about that, it's critical. There are lots of tools that you can use to measure the moisture, and you can see where your root development is happening and where your moisture needs to be adjusted. And with Multicote, it's essential that Multicote is placed in the root zone where your moisture is kept optimal. And we'll touch on that a little bit later. All right, so on the that's the plant. If we look at the technology for efficient nutrition, Multicote as a controlled release fertilizer is probably one of the better products that you can look at. It's basically a water-soluble core that is coated with a polymer shell or polymer coating, and that coating forms a membrane which gives you a release that allows moisture in. And if you remember the rules of osmosis or diffusion, moisture goes in, it dissolves the nutrient on the inside, and then you have a salt concentration inside the granule and a lower salt concentration outside in the root zone, and thus diffusion takes place where the salt tries to balance on either side of the membrane. Now that first stage takes 7 to 10 days, and it depends on the thickness of the coating and the permeability of the coating, but normally 7 to 10 days is this first stage. The second stage is where most of the nutrient is now dissolved inside, and you have a much higher rate of release, and the release now becomes constant because you're having a constant moisture going in. The salinity is now almost stays constant, and your diffusion takes place on a regular basis. Once the nutrients are fully dissolved and the salt concentration now starts reducing, we end up with stage 3, which we call the decay stage. And basically, this is the final stage where the release slows down until there's no salt left inside the granule. If you look at it on a graph cumulatively, we have the lag stage, which is 7 to 10 days. Then we have a linear release over the period that we specify. So we say it's a Multicote 3 or Multicote 4. Then this period is basically 4 months that we will get to the decay stage. And then this final stage is your decay, and that takes as long as there's moisture and there's salt at either side. All right, so basically we calibrate our products at 21 degrees. So we say that it will last 3 months or 4 months or 5 months, whatever, at 21 degrees. Temperature is the only factor other than the salt concentration, and that's according to Fick's second law of diffusion. Temperature is the only factor that can increase or decrease the rate of diffusion. Obviously, the warmer it is, it increases the rate of diffusion, and your product will have a shorter longevity. And vice versa, when it is cold, your release will be slower and your product will last longer. The test that we have done is that at below 6 degrees, there's very little or almost no release. So basically, we're sitting any soil that's sort of between 10 and 20, 25 is an optimal for the release rate to work. And that's important. What's important to note is that a plant also reacts the way the Multicote is reacting. The warmer it is, the faster the plant grows, the more nutrients it requires. So the Multicote will also provide it with more, and cool, vice versa. Plant grows slower, it needs less nutrients, and there's less being released, so they actually match each other perfectly. If we look at Multicote Agri, I'll tell you now what Multicote Agri is, but it's basically a combination of different coated materials of different longevities with normal granular fertilizers, which are readily available. And we often talk about a starter. So the granular fertilizer is your starter. It's immediately available when you apply it in the soil. It's immediately there for the plant. And then the controlled release takes over. And basically this starter fertilizer covers that lag period where there's no release or very little release. So that's basically what that is for. So with Multicote Agri, we can adjust our NPK composition, we can adjust the longevity, and we can adjust the percentage of coating to virtually suit any crop or soil type or climate, and to match those graphs that I showed you of the N, P, and K, how the release needs to happen. So we can match those. And here's an example of how we would determine what percentage of coating to do. So we have this table is from sand to clay, and down here is the water regime from arid to humid tropical. So basically we would start off at 25% on a very high clay content soil in a very dry condition. And we will move to probably 75% of coating under humid tropical conditions. And then that's the guideline, and from there we would take it and do different things. With what we also have is we have enough raw materials that we can provide nitrogen as a 2-month release, for instance, and we can provide MAP or potassium, phosphate, also as a 2-month release. So we can increase the availability of the nitrogen and phosphorus in the early stage, and we can use a 4-month potassium nitrate coated to allow our potassium to be released at the later stage of the growing cycle. So basically, plant establishment, we want higher nitrogen phosphate for root establishment, vegetative growth, and then when we get to the flowering and fruiting stage, we change the ratio of NP and K and match the nutrient uptake. So basically, a single application gives us multiple benefits. It feeds the plant according to their needs. It improves nutrient use efficiency and allows for reduced application rates. You'll see some of the rates that we reduce on the trials, 20 to 25% sometimes, and more. It's a single application, so it saves you on labor and time. It's applied independently of your irrigation. So if you're in a high rainfall area, you do not need to apply water to get your fertilizer in as you would with a water-soluble fertilizer. It's a sustainable solution. It minimizes your environmental impact of the fertilizers. And I think that's something that's important these days. There's no runoff, there's no leaching. It's important that one considers that. And it's a cost-effective solution. It's not a cheap solution, but it's a cost-effective solution. And I hope to show you some of that in my trial results that we showed shortly. So yeah, so application is critical. It needs to be in the soil. It needs to be covered with soil or with compost or with mulch so that you get constant moisture around the granule for diffusion to take place on a constant basis. So generally, we would say if you're planting seeds, we would be 5 centimeters from the seed row and 5 to 10 centimeters below the seed row. And this will be your active root zone, which is why we want it in that area. If you're planting field crops or you're planting plants or trees, 5 to 10 centimeters away, and then again 5 to 10 centimeters deep. If you're in a very hot climate where you have no root development in this top 10 centimeters, then one would go down deeper. So here are just 3 basic guidelines. You can band the fertilizer either side of the plant row. You can band it below the row. You can mix it into the whole ridge around the plant in the root zone. What we do not want is a heaped amount of fertilizer in the planting hole, and we also do not want it spread on the surface because it dries out there. Just another graphic here, you can see we have precision planters with coaters, and basically they can drill the fertilizer in either pre-planting or post-planting into the right root zone. On potatoes specifically, if you have your seed opener, if you look carefully, you can see these green arrows are showing where the coulters are dropping the fertilizer, and you can see the seed will be here, this orange line in the middle, so your seed will be here, and the fertilizer has been put on either side of this opener. And when your disc closer comes to form the ridge, it's basically mixing all that fertilizer in this band over the multicote, over the tuber. Here's just an example of a farmer that is, instead of having a planter with fertilizer and potatoes on the back, he's put his fertilizer spreader on the front, and that's banding the fertilizer in exactly the same positions as the picture on the right. You can see the 2 bands of fertilizer there, with the tuber lying where the seed opener has opened the groove. And then when the ridger comes and it closes up, you can see how it closes up over the potato. And that gives you an idea of a farmer that's committed to using Multicote, and he's doing it as an all-in-one application at planting. So Multicote is in the root zone. It's a healthy root zone, and you can see how your fine root hairs are there. You can see how the mycorrhiza and your soil microbes enjoy the Multicote, because as long as that fertilizer is in that granule, it has no effect on the soil around it. All right, some results, and I see my time is running out. My apologies for that. It's just a lot of information. Here's an example from near Cape Town. We planted, and you can see we had poor seed quality. and the result was here almost 30-ton difference as a result of the tuber not having enough energy. These tubers rotted on both sides with the same quality seed, but because the multicote was concentrated in the root zone, our plants survived and the rest didn't. What we see are observations. Multicote plants have 4 to 5 stems, so we get better development there. Where the farmer's practice has 1, sometimes 2. The plants flower earlier, which means that they've gone through their growth phases a little bit faster or a lot more smoother, and the tubers appear more advanced from initiation. We often find more large-sized tubers and also more uniform sizing of the tubers, so the plant is balanced, the nutrient availability is balanced, so the plants develop together. This is an example from another farm. They had 4 sites where they developed, and in our first year that we worked with them, we started with a 4.2% yield improvement of only 2 tons. What was important, we did the financial analysis at the end. We applied 60 to 65% of the nutrients that were supplied by their control in 4 applications as opposed to 10. We then looked at the costs of the fertilizer, and we were sitting at $83 a hectare more, which, if you consider the 2.2 tons, we still had a benefit of $260 per hectare. So what we did notice when we did a session after the season, we discussed what went wrong or what went right. And we realized that our multicote longevity was not good enough, so we ran out of legs, as they say. We did initiate more tubers, but they were smaller due to the not having enough nutrients in that bulking phase, and we didn't plan on doing an application there, which we should have. So the following year, we changed the recipe, changed the formulas. We did trials again on 4 different sites, and you can see one of the varieties they planted had a huge problem with brown spot, and they ended up, we had a 26 ton a hectare better there because we didn't have as much brown spot. So the plant was healthier, it was more balanced, and brown spot generally on this variety comes if you apply too much nitrogen, the plant becomes too vigorous. On the here you can see visually, you can see the multicote plants are just greener, where it's a lot more yellow and brown on the conventional part of the field. We did a 3rd year with the same crowd. We again adjusted slightly our formulas, and our yield increase was only 5 tons a hectare. But if you look carefully here, the control had 2 extra applications, which wasn't initially budgeted, and on this farm they had 3 extra applications, because during the season they could see they were getting behind, so they were trying to keep up and keep the plants on the same level. So we're sitting with an 8.7% average yield increase, but still we are better off. In another area, an area where with your nitrogen is a problem, it's a very dead sand. We did trials. We're sitting on the same treatment, but we're sitting with 18% less nutrient applied in total, and also you can see we've reduced the actual NPK that's been applied. In another area, 3rd area that we've been doing trials, we've applied 80% of conventional, so it's 20% saving in transport and delivery and everything on the farm, but we didn't reduce the NP, we reduced the phosphate slightly, but the N and the K we didn't reduce, because this farmer was not happy with his actual yield, he wanted to increase, so we decided not to reduce the nitrogen and potassium. And we harvested 2 weeks prior to harvest, we did 6-meter strips, and at harvest we took out 50-meter strips, and we were sitting with 13% more large, medium, and medium. If one looks at the tons per hectare, when we did the 6-meter strips, we were looking at about 7.5 tons better on the multicote, as opposed to when we got to harvest with the 50-meter strips, we were 4.5 ton better. But now, if one looks at, if you consider the 13% more large, medium, and mediums, which is your marketable sizes, and you put that into rand value or put it into monetary value, you can see we've increased there by basically $1,688 based on the market prices at that time that we did the harvest. So it's a 12% yield increase that we did there. And that's something that one should look at. It's not just how many tons you're getting, but also what is your marketable yield that you're getting, that you're improving on. And here's an example from France. It's a potato that they harvest for the size, a small size, for a very special niche market. So don't look at the tons per hectare is low because they're not looking for massive tons. They're looking for volume of tubers. And you can see here we increased the yield by a ton, and we increased the turnover here by almost €2,000 per hectare. So there's definite value. And what is important to note here is that our competitor here was a slow release product, nitrogen slow release product. I won't mention the name, but you can see we applied different formulas, and basically our fertilizer cost was the same per hectare. So we're sitting there with a good profit on this field. If we go and look at sweet potato trials, all from Australia, unfortunately, I don't have any from South Africa, but basically way back in 2005, the farmer, we used a formula, a 6-month formula, 14, 16, 25, 61% coated nitrogen, 0% coated phosphate, 70% coated potassium. And you can see we're sitting here with 3 applications versus 1. And we went at 3 different rates of that same formula. And at 75% was the best income per hectare, obviously the best cost ratio. But you can see that at the 90%, we still improved yield. And basically, it again comes back to marketable yield. Where's the money? And the money is in the medium size, not in the large, which is the gray line. So you're in the mediums, and in the smalls, you're getting good prices. And that's why we got such a high increase in income there. A more recent trial also done in Australia. You can see the standard growth. You can see it's a much smaller, weaker plant compared to the Multicote, which was planted here in these 5 rows to the left, and to the right was the conventional. And we're sitting here, and they measured similar sizes, and basically you're sitting here with a 20% yield increase and a 22% increase in value of that crop. If we go and look at, there's another trial here with 3 farmers. They're using the same, they're all using the same formula, but they're applying it at different rates because they're trying to match it to their conventional programs. And down below here, you can see how the matching is. You can see we're way over on the nitrogen on this middle farmer, but he's 100% of the phosphate and he's at 76% of the potassium. And on the right here, you can see they all had yield increases with the Multicote. The farmer was using the lowest here, basically got the best yield improvement and a return on investment of almost 60. So that's for every dollar spent, he got $60 back for using that. So there's a lot of results that we can lean on. Our approaches on potato is what we follow. As I said, these 3 critical stages of application in the initiation and start of bulking. And just to give you an idea, in South Africa, Christiana is this area. This area here is the Sandveld, and this area is Philippi, which is in Cape Town, and the different soils there, different climates. So you'll see the Sandveld plants mainly autumn to spring, the Christiana's plants from spring to autumn, and Philippi's plants only in the spring crop due to the climate. So they're choosing their climate based on that. What we've also changed the way we do the application. So we have 3 basic approaches. 2-ton gypsum is almost a standard. At planting on the Sandveld, which is a barren sand, we sit with a formula with no starter and no urea. And on the Christiana, which is a better soil, slightly more, less leaching and better climate, we're sitting with a product that has a small starter, also a ton a hectare of these 2 formulas. We follow up with Haifa Turbo K at emergence, whereas on Philippi, which is being planted at the end of our winter and sometimes prone to heavy rain, they plant with no fertilizer and at emergence they spread the fertilizer and then they ridge up over the plant, so all mixed in. And then between week 2 and 4 we apply some calcium nitrate. This is to boost that calcium. You remember the graph. And then we follow up in week 5 at the end of initiation, week 5, week 6, when you go and do a count and you see you have enough tubers initiated, we apply the turbo-K that basically kicks the plant, gives it a response to change back to slightly vegetative and not to continue initiating. And then in week 6 or 7, or basically 2 weeks after this first one, we would apply another Multicote, which is your potassium nitrate, to boost the bulking stage. And then depending on your initiation, week 8 or 9, you can follow up with the third application, top dress, if needed. So these are the formulas. And basically, if you see the 3 formulas, the percentage coating has changed, formulas is different. And that's how each one differs, and each area differs based on the climate and on the requirement for the crop. Potassium Haifa turbo-K is basically our go-to granule. It's a compound, NPK compound with zinc, magnesium, and iron in. 100% plant nutrients, free of sodium and chloride, but a low salt index, so it's an ideal top dress fertilizer for most crops. On the sweet potato, something is basically, you can see the difference between the Australian program, and this is the South African formula that we use. 83% and 90% coated of your N-K. And you can see again the nitrogen ratio that we change according to the requirement. So that's basically the formats or the approaches that we use. I can only say Multicote Agri offers you efficient nutrition for all your tuber crops. It's important to suit the formula to the crop and the growth conditions. So your NPK balance, your release profile, your percentage coating, your microelements, in or not. It's important to consult an agronomist to help you with these decisions. Our unique advantage of Haifa CRS is the coated potassium nitrate. It's something that nobody else has. And we also have the additional products such as the coated boron, which can address specific situations. And that's it. Thank you very much. Sorry I took so long. Any questions?
Thank you, Michael, for the very interesting and professional information. We almost end the time, so we'll answer on only a few questions, and for other questions, we'll send an email we'll ask. One question is regarding how can you plan potassium application to the later stages of the growing? How can you use the control-release fertilizer to apply the...
Can you just repeat that again? Sorry, Joshua, you didn't come through.
How can you use the control-release fertilizer, the Multicote, to apply potassium in the later growth stage of the crop?
Okay, so yeah. Okay, so yeah, basically we have potassium nitrate, which is coated 2 months, 4 months, 8 months, or different, and in between, I think there's a 6-month also. And using the longer longevity, you can have your potassium nitrate available in the bulking stage, which is between 40 to 100 days. You can basically have a 4-month release of your potassium nitrate in that later part of the season. So we can change the potassium nitrate like that. And having potassium nitrate in that phase where you need the ammonium nitrate balance and you want the high nitrate, it's ideal using potassium nitrate in that phase.
Okay, thank you. Can we reduce the nitrogen application rate because we are using controllers in sandy soils, for example?
Yes. Yes, in sandy soils where we have high leaching, it's very easy to reduce. And some of the trials that we have done, we've gone down to 50% of the nitrogen, although we generally would recommend between 20 and 30% reduction of nitrogen, which is the saving. But if you're going to read the literature, up to 50% of nitrogen that is applied in conventional forms is lost. So we could actually, that's why I say some of the trials we've done, we have reduced to 50% and still got better results than with conventional fertilizer. But it depends on the situation, and one needs to, that's where your agronomist needs to make the right call.
Okay, thank you. I think the time's up. So thank you, Michael. It was very interesting. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And as I said, all our webinars are on the Haifa website. If you missed earlier webinar, you can find there. And bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.